All right. I'll keep an eye out on the waiting list while on the waiting room while people still come in, but I'd love to get started. Again, thank you, Ray and Savitri, for your time this evening. The floor is yours. I'll go ahead and let you guys introduce yourself. I'll tell a little more about the session today, and we can get right ahead into the discussion. Raymond.
Awesome. Well, first of all, Rakib, thanks for having me on today, and nice to meet you, Savidri. I am Raymond Deanne, currently the ambassador for food systems entrepreneurship at Penn State University. A lot of my work early on dealt more with agricultural conservation, watersheds, stuff of that sort. So super excited to talk a little bit about kind of the intersection between water, food, agriculture. As we'll talk, we'll probably get a little bit deeper into it. But a lot of the issues that we're facing, especially with our watersheds, directly relate with food systems and agriculture. So we can dig a little bit into that later on.
Hi, sorry. My name is Savitri Grover, and hi, Raymond, nice to meet you, and thank you for inviting me today to the panel. Small world, I was briefly at Penn State, the Harrisburg campus. Did my PhD from St. Louis University. I'm currently a Global Goal Ambassador for SDG 6. For my work is an intersection of different things. So my work focuses mostly, it comes in many forms, like collaborated work with other partners, nonprofit organization, or it can be community oriented focus. Often use art as a mode to do advocacy work, and also sometimes just engaging by data driven writing briefs and all that. So those are kind of like combination of work which focuses on highlighting SDG 6.
Lovely, great to hear from both of you. And Savitri, that's very cool to know you're from Penn State as well. So this is a full Penn State panel, and nothing but more proud. Yeah, I currently am a senior at Penn State University studying information science. So I guess a little bit about myself. Joining in on the panel to kind of facilitate our discussion at the intersection of AI and agriculture, focusing specifically on the water and sanitation side of things. Raymond, you did mention some of the projects that you've particularly worked, and coming from a tech background like yourself in the agriculture space. How's that been? So what are some of the challenges you've seen or have faced yourself, slash some of the advantages that you've seen coming from a data slash technology side into the agriculture space?
Yeah, I will talk a little bit about it, but then just to keep it on topic with, since this topic today is more so about the water side of things, so I'll more so talk about perhaps the intersection of some of the things I've worked on with emerging technologies at the intersection of water and agriculture. And so, yeah, so one of the big things, one of the big issues, especially throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is nutrient runoff, right? A lot of the fertilizer that is applied onto our land does not fully bind to the roots. So whenever you have rainfall, whenever you have natural rainfall and natural runoff, right? A lot of this nutrient runs off straight into our waterways, into our watersheds. It ends up in the bay, and then what ends up happening is a lot of this nutrient. There's this process called eutrophication, right? So think about what happens when you have all of this nutrient in our waterways, right? It's food. It's essentially food for the algae. It's food for all the microorganisms in the waterways, and these microorganisms will eat up all these nutrients, and they will completely cover our watersheds, and this ends up killing a lot of our fish. It kills the biodiversity in these waterways. Just overall, not a good problem, right? And so, one of the first labs I ever worked with when I first got to Penn State was a laboratory exploring if we could use certain emerging technologies to tackle this problem, right? And what this lab did was explore using satellite imagery to see if we can track certain conservation methods to prevent nutrient runoff. So let me see how I can best describe this, right? Satellite imagery, as many of you folks might know, we can see a lot of stuff from above, right? We have these satellites that are moving, orbiting around the Earth. They're taking images, and you can basically see the geography of the planet, right? You can see the colors of the planet. You can see vegetation. You can see all these different things, and you can see that most importantly throughout time, right? You can see on a temporal, coming from a data science background, you can see on a temporal view, right? You can see it throughout time, throughout the seasons, throughout the weeks, throughout the years, right? And so we kind of had this theory with this lab that we were working with that, what if we can track some of the conservation methods that folks were using to try to prevent this nutrient runoff, right? So what we did was, our lab really focused on, okay, can we spot certain conservation methods from above, right? And these conservation methods include different riparian buffers. Riparian buffers are strips of vegetation along riverbanks, right? So you can install this vegetation along riverbanks that will essentially stop the nutrient from getting into our rivers. And so some of the things we were working on related to, okay, can we track this vegetation throughout the years? Is this something we can automate? Is this something we could use something like computer vision for, right? It's something that you can, okay, perhaps you can track a lot of this vegetation across the entire bay. And so that's kind of some of the things that we got the chance to work on. And it's a very interesting intersection, at the intersection of food, agriculture, water, and trying to explore some emerging technologies. Yeah, so that's one thing that we got the chance to work on. And of course, folks across the College of Agricultural Sciences at Penn State are trying to explore perhaps other emerging technologies, perhaps ways to measure water quality better, just a whole plethora of stuff. And I'm sure we can get to some of those other emerging technologies later on in the call.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing kind of in a very simplified way, pretty complex data science problem that you've tackled in the geosystems slash ecology slash sort of the agriculture space. That's very, very cool. And the nutrient runoff issue has always been very prevalent, especially kind of in the global south, where a lot of economies depend on the farming slash agricultural efforts that they have just nationwide. And yeah, one of the most pressing challenges for them, just economically, even on a national level, is something that we see. And being able to tackle it using emerging technologies, be it AI, be it big data, it's amazing to see something very practical being done in that sense. Savitri, I definitely want to bring in a little bit of your sort of global or policy lens into this specific project idea that you've heard Ray kind of describe, slash the problem specifically of nutrient runoff and other water related problems that we see in agriculture. I'd love to know some of your insights, what you've seen from a policy side of things, and a global sort of perspective into this discussion so far.
Mm, I don't have experience in agriculture per se, so I'm not expert in that. But from working back, I used to work at Mayor's at St. Louis. Was
Sorry, I think you cut off for a second.
can you hear?
I'm sorry if it was just me.
I'm so sorry. I think my device sometimes does that. I have to fix it at some point.
No.
So I was saying when I was there during the flood event, Mayor created a task force, and I was part of that task force using GIS to, getting real data from the ground, and I was using that data to create maps in real time so that the resources can be distributed in a way that. And during that process, we figured out we were focused on two areas, and completely there was one third area in that process, and then we need to mobilize those resources to that third area. And that was a great experience, learning experience for me, how the technology, in a real time when the city government are using that, and then with those, that data, then of course FEMA also came to provide support and all that. And they uses the local data to, update their database. But the point is that with those real-time data and seeing that what work, what doesn't work, inform the policy decision in real time, and those are more impactful that way. So that was one of the great real-time experience to utilizing technology like GIS. Of course, now I think AI is also is being integrated in a lot of technologies we've been using. So yeah, that was an interesting experience from policy aspect.
Very, very cool. And also, if anything, very, very inspiring to actually see projects of these utilizing cutting edge sort of technology are not just stuck in school labs or think tanks. It's actually being implemented from a policy standpoint in local governments. And I think at the end of the day, hyper localized solutions will bring about global impacts, because you can't create a global solution for everyone in general. The beauty of us humans is that we're very, very unique. Fortunately or unfortunately, it works to our advantage or disadvantage at times, but solutions of these sorts and scale must definitely be hyper localized, and the idea that you bring in from a local government perspective, implementing these solutions starting from satellite or GIS analytics to using and implementing AI in the policy sector to implement these cutting edge solutions. Very, very cool to hear that. Savitri, I also wanted to kind of bring you in on the topic of water and sanitation crisis that's out there in most of the world today, especially in continents like Asia and Africa. And someone being from part of the global south, it is something I've witnessed firsthand. And so I'd love to know kind of your global perspective on it as per your sort of discussions and stuff that you've had as a global goals ambassador.
So the reason why I chose SDG 6 as a topic, because that's something personally I also experienced growing up. Most of my young childhood time with my mother and my sister we would be waiting for gather water and all that. And the area we were in, and it was in Delhi, like a capital of India back then. And for sanitation reason, they were like not safe. Sanitation, a place, especially being a woman or a young girl, privacy and all that, and safety, those were the issues. So growing up firsthand, experiencing that, and it changes your perspective. So that was one of the reasons personally I felt like that's something I can bring in with my storytelling technique, and maybe, sometime when it's like too much, I create art and through that try to communicate those topics. Like sometime for the most part, I think for the Western world, it's like these issues of clean water and sanitation, think of it like, okay, these are the developing world countries' problem. But in today's day and age, with the climate change happening, a season changing, so much rainfall, drought and all that, is not an issue of that part of the world. Is like, we are all facing it. Is here in the US itself, we're seeing so much extreme weather pattern and all that, it impact us here as well. So I think that's my one personal take, and coming from the local where I growing up to bringing it to the global, why it is a global issue, whether we are in a developing or a developed world.
Super cool. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your personal insights on the issue as well. And very, very interesting that you bring up the idea of climate change and kind of adding another dimension to our discussion today, kind of tying it back to our previous topic that Ray, you were talking about with the water runoff, the runoff issue, and nutrient runoff that happens. Much of it can be attributed to the growing problems of the climate crisis, where temperature changes and a lot of other sort of environmental changes impact very small, intricate ecological balances that we have today, and much of it's preserved by the environment that we live in, and kind of altering it using human sort of intervenes is not the best way to go about, as we can kind of see from the after effects. One of the issues that one of my friends was kind of mentioning, and I wanted to bring it up, was the idea of temperature changes, frequent temperature changes in certain localities, leading to lead erosion in water pipes, and other sort of issues like that, which is sort of almost undermining the clean water infrastructure that we have in the world set up today. Like you said, in the developed world, it's becoming a challenge today here as well, and not just a challenge for when we traditionally think of just the global south. Ray, definitely wanted a little bit of your technology lens in the global water sanitation crisis discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, right? I know this conversation circle is more centered around AI, and that's kind of that was supposed to be the topic, but I would say, you know, a lot of these water issues, right, are not necessarily the issues can't necessarily be solved by, you know, AI alone, right? These are very physical problems, you know, problems that deal with you know, you talked about water temperature, right? That's absolutely an issue even in Center County in Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania state right now, right? You know, we have these issues where, you know, there's hot pavement and it rains and this hot water goes into our rivers and you see a spike in the temperature. You know, you take a look at you know, the temperature measurements of the water, right? You see a spike in the water, and this is, you know, this is bad for our trout. You know, these all of these you know, kind of, you know, these problems kind of like one thing leads to another, right? But, you know, problems of that sort are they're very much like in the physical world, and how AI, or, you know, even data science, right? A lot of this stuff is maybe not as much AI, but more so like data analytics. A lot of those problems can definitely be informed by taking better measurements, right? And so where we see technology being used is more so, I think, as Savitri mentioned earlier, to inform policy decisions, right? If we have better proof, we can make better decisions in the physical world rather than trying to, you know, use AI to directly solve the problem. So that's kind of where a lot of these emerging technologies come into play.
Yeah, for sure. And like you did mention, a lot of these issues, water related issues that we face, and sanitary and hygiene issues that we face in the world today, are very physical and very real world, and not necessarily out in the virtual that you put a VR on, and the water sanitation issue is something you see. Not really. It's actually quite the opposite. You don't see these issues anymore once you get immersed in the digital world, kind of powered and by AI at the very forefront of it today. But a very cool point that you bring up, the idea of using AI for better KPIs, better measurements, better sort of indicators of these issues that solidify our claim on the issues themselves, allowing for more concrete policy changes that traditionally, you know, could were being argued against because there's not enough data. And today, once we have this data and we are clearly seeing, like the example that you mentioned, bad for trout, these sudden temperature changes in these water bodies directly impacting life underwater, that also impacts livelihood of people who depend on this life underwater, depends on the ecology of the water itself, and things of of that sort, getting the measurements using AI and being able to analyze them properly in a multitude of different ways definitely opens up doors to better policy changes and policy adaptation to these rising problems. And on that note, I would love to actually direct this conversation over to our audience and open up the floor to more of an open dialogue setting as we near the halfway mark of our conversation now. I'll go ahead and remove the spotlights. Just bear with me. Sorry. Okay. There you go. I will open up the floor. Looks like we do already have a few questions and raised hands from the audience. Vaishnavi, yes, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to follow up on the previous question we had, how we can use AI, whether it's for data analytics and better measurement. I wonder, can we use AI for better prediction of possible erosion? So like we're noticing that like, this would be more high risk of erosion, when we're dealing with these pipes or, lead or other, dangerous chemicals kind of eroding in those pipes.
That's a great question. Let's see. Now, I've never directly worked with anyone who's specifically targeting lead pipes, but I've worked very closely with folks applying, AI, predictive analytics to HVAC systems. And, if you think about some of the parallels, perhaps there might be some parallels there. They're trying to use analytics, predictive analytics to predict the failure of HVAC systems with all different types of sensors. Um, lead pipes and water infrastructure in Pennsylvania as a whole is also another big issue too, right? I mean, I was talking with someone from the one of the folks at the Pennsylvania Department of Natural Resources that oversees a lot of the wastewater plants. And one of the big issues right now is we're going to be facing a huge lack of talent for managing these wastewater plants. And so there is a technology piece to this that could perhaps, lessen some of the burden for the lack of talent too, right? So perhaps that could be another place where the technology could come in.
Thank you, Vaishnavi and Raymond. Glad for you to have taken the question. Anna, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Savitri and Raymond. I really enjoyed hearing about your experience, and Savitri, I actually had a lot to resonate to and relate to everything you were saying, especially coming from Delhi and growing up in Delhi and being from there, and also using art as a means of expression. And I like the way that you're combining creativity as well as advocacy for the same. So that was really interesting. Art for me is mostly just personal expression. So I mostly focus on storytelling about personal experiences, but it's great to see another perspective on that and seeing how you can blend advocacy with that and create a visual storytelling way with art. So that was great to hear about. I don't have any particular questions about that. But for Raymond, coming from or to introduce the cybersecurity point of view, being someone that's involved heavily in secure design systems and designing secure applications for users, and also coming from a user experience HCDD background from Penn State as well. I just wondered if AI can be used as something to not just predict and monitor these processes, such as adding vegetation to block out river blends or water bodies, but can it be used to visualize or provide like visual data for users? Because I just am bringing that up since in the past conversations with the SDGs, we've learned that there's privacy concerns for users and there's a hesitancy when it comes to using technology per se. So have you experienced these users, or have you experienced or have you heard any stories about these users feeling hesitant about using technology, or are there any particular privacy concerns that stand out? Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Anna. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of hesitancy for use of technology in waterways as well as in agriculture. There's multiple different types of hesitancies. I'll try to break it down into the different types of hesitancies for adopting technology. One of the big ones is simply the privacy and the usage of the data alone, right? You know, one of the big issues in agriculture and the agriculture and agribusiness industry is the usage of this data against the farmer, right? So think about like that information advantage, right? You know, in a lot of commodity markets, having an information advantage is huge. It's a huge deal for, you know, for the companies to be able to, you know, gain an edge on trading that commodity. So, you know, if you think about it from that perspective, it's like, okay, you know, if I have better data, if I can collect the better data, I can use it to gain an edge when I buy this commodity. So that's one of the huge concerns about like, okay, what if this agribusiness gets their hands on to this data? I don't want any folks collecting this data, which is why folks have been trying to come up with third-party verification for the usage of data, right? There's a group, there's a nonprofit called Ag Data Transparent, and they're basically a third-party nonprofit that, you know, helps verify how different companies are utilizing this data. And so basically before any one of these companies can collect that data, they have like this, it's almost like a chart of different usage. Like how could they use this data, right? Like, oh, you have to notify me before this data gets shared to any other entity, the types of data that's collected, stuff of that sort, right? And so that's kind of been some of the solutions when it comes to okay, how do we make sure people are using data in the safe way? There's a few other angles too when it comes to hesitancy to using technology, right? Unfortunately, some parts of this is also kind of political. You know, when it comes to data collection, sometimes collecting certain data can lead to certain policies happening. And sometimes the folks that don't want those policies to happen might create policies to prevent the collection of data in the first place. And so that's one of the problems that can arise, unfortunately, in the world, right? You know, there's been, unfortunately, a lot of cases around the country where, you know, policies have come down from the top to prevent the collection of data in waterways so that the folks can't prove that there's, you know, certain things happening. And so there's kind of a that piece of it, and then the, you know, the hesitancy from adopting the technology. But that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think you answered it really well. And the explanation of the breakdown of hesitancy really makes sense. And ag data was actually a tool that I'm familiar with. So yeah, it answered my question perfectly. So thanks for that.
This is great to hear. Thank you both for kind of the discussion piece that the rest of us got to hear. That was very, very interesting. Kind of bringing in, thank you, Anna, for like a little bit of a cybersecurity perspective into the discussion. On that note, like you said, Raymond, on a very last note that you said, the sort of negative impact of policy, in a sense, on these efforts towards water sanitation and hygiene in local communities. This is very, very interesting, and unfortunately, it's a part of the real world, and it does happen. So, Savitri, coming from a global goals, as a global goals ambassador, being in the policy space with water and sanitation as a passion that you pursue, I would love to kind of know how the policy space looks like, especially in the agriculture, focusing on the water side of things. What are some developments that you've seen happen? What are some things that hold back policy in this regard, that you've personally have gotten from the conversations, meetings, conferences, and tables that you've discussed at?
From agriculture perspective, as I earlier said, not an expert in that field, but from just the data privacy perspective, and it's always an ethical question how the data is used, and especially when it's come to, like, you know, policies and who is using the data and how it is, it's a real thing, how is it manipulated, to so certain thing. We might be collecting it in a, in a sense like exactly with the here, but it is, but how it is presented, and it can of course make or change a lot of impact, a lot of policy decision based on that. Not from here, but I when I was listening, I just remember an example of
Sorry, I hate to say it. I think you were cut off for a sec. If you could just repeat the
yeah,
last.
so I was saying, so when I was listening, I sort of remember one experience from my um, younger time there in India, when we didn't used to have a regular supply of water for some reason. I mean, whatever political reason, it's party change and everything. It was never like, worked for like, hey, let's get the pipeline done and everything so that everyone has access to water at home. So you have to rely on tankers which will come, so you have to line up with everybody, and it's real mad. So it was stressful. So one thing is like, whichever party would be in the power there, they would like try to claim, hey, we are the one who sent. So it's always like, fighting and struggle. It's like such a basic need, but just trying to claim, I don't know how to explain it, like on their part, we did something, rather than fixing the issue with the infrastructure, just having that pipeline so nobody has to just spend and hours and hours in all kind of weather just to get, drinkable water there. So that was something I remember from the discussion, how the, the data collection and all that, how it can be sway in a way to present certain cases or like certain other picture. But that was interesting.
Very cool, where political sort of entities will try to go for more of a recognition of solution of a problem than the actual solution itself. It's like, hey, I did it, then what did you actually do? So very, very interesting, sort of a very real world perspective. And I definitely wanted to go back on this one, your idea of combining art and advocacy. Just gonna hold that thought for 1 second before and we'll take question from Brooke real quick before we go ahead and do that. Yeah, Brooke. Sorry, I think your mic might be muted. No worries. Brooke, while you get your sort of the mic kind of checked. Savitri, yeah, gonna go back to that point of blending art and advocacy. Was very, very interested to know. I myself used to paint a while and have been a big fan of it just in general. So I'd love to know, how did you kind of blend the both? Where did the interest kind of come from?
So the interest in art is growing up back, art, being an artist wasn't considered a career option. So it's always remained with me, so I think during just right before the pandemic in 2019, towards the mid or the end of 2019, I was like, personally was trying to see certain avenue, being an immigrant. Sometimes you have to go through certain kind of adjustment and all that, away from your home country. So I was like, I need an outlet. So I picked up the paintbrush, and I was also trying to, like, there were two things going on. I was like, I want to talk about certain issues which I'm very passionate about, but how do I do it? So that's where, okay, how do I express them out? And that's how it's literally started. Like, okay, like me, this is one of my passion since I was a child, and I have participated in a lot of competition back in growing up in India. So I was like, how will I combine that? Those. So what I try or acrylic or anything. Also, what I try to do from my personal experience, I will try to just create a piece, and through that, I will try to tell the story, like what's in like in real life happens, like the example I mentioned. So I think it was few years ago during to celebrate World Toilet Day, that's what it's called. I created a series for a week where I created a different painting focusing on the sanitation aspect, just to bring awareness. So I bring it like each day I will just maybe at the end of at the end of the day, it was a quiz about that. And these kind of certain taboo topics, people don't like to talk about it, but these are real world issues which are happening. So those kind of thing I try to just experiment with the so right now I'm working on art competition for kids, and also trying to see if we can send out photography competition. I'm working on the logistic, focus on SDG 6 and all those kind of things. So bringing in all those, creating theme around that, which is informed by real world examples or stories, or maybe data. You can, create art based on the information we get from the real world data. So those are all the kind of thing I'm trying to experiment and, merge together. So the whole idea is to you as a person, all of these are aspect of your identity. So you don't have to have it in a separate, box says, hey, I'm at the daytime or nighttime or the weekend, I'm an artist. How can I combine all of this, whether it's my policy background or me being like to, art and express in that way, or, work with the community, being part of different organization and non-profit, and, how can I bring all that? So that's how it's just all collaboration, like, birth, everything came together for me. I'm still exploring. It's not like you figure out in one day, it's still a process. You learn a lot during. So it's an interesting experiment for sure.
Very interesting for us to hear as well. And I'm definitely not the only one with the head nods and the smiles, but that was very, very cool to hear. A very sort of unconventional way of going about your advocacy, passion for advocacy, and the global goals. Going back to Brooke, yeah, you had a question before.
Yes, can you guys hear me? Does it work? Good. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Well, yeah, I appreciate you too, Raymond and Savitri. I really think that the work you guys are doing is really inspiring. You know, I, I think also from what you were saying, Savitri, that like when you mentioned how you were working with GIS and using that for policy, and how you related that to your own experience of growing up, not having enough sanitized water, for people in your community. I can see how maybe those two actually end up being connected in the sense that, oh, for people to get proper water, um, we have to have better policies in place, for this water to be transported and sourced in a certain way. And GIS on top of that can help with that, maybe sorting or figure out even like more logistic wise of more of like how this water could end up being, distributed or, found and sourced for certain local communities, which I think is absolutely amazing. So yeah, just I see the vision, I see how it all kind of correlates together. I just wanted to also talk towards Raymond, Ray, about, I know Matt, you mentioned earlier about how a lot of times when you're working with this like vegetation banks that you're talking about, how a lot of it is mostly just measurements that need to be taken, and I guess to a certain point awareness of what measurements to take. But with the changing like climate that we have, and the changing landscape, there's only so much that you can predict, and maybe to a certain point even be aware of the type of measurements that you have to take. I was thinking, at what point do regular measurements not work, and further analysis, further technology needs to be implemented, and how maybe AI can come into that? Do you think it'd be viable? For example, I don't know, just certain vegetation banks require that, like there's certain vegetation banks that you have, but then maybe you want to get the certain shape or the certain distribution of the vegetation bank. Maybe there's like a digital twin, to somewhat curate, connecting, climate change and weather, and connecting that to your digital twin of the area to further protect the nutrification, or to stop nutrification, if I remember.
Yeah, that could be a great idea. It's a lot of it just comes down to, of course, vegetation and riparian buffers. This is physical vegetation, right? So the entire reasoning behind, a lot of our agricultural conservation folks at Penn State using GIS is because, it is something that, a very small team could go ahead and track different conservation projects across all of Pennsylvania with a small team without being there in person, right? The main usage of GIS right now there's a new center at Penn State called ACAP, stands for Agricultural Conservation Assistance Program. And the usage of GIS there is, if folks are familiar with ArcGIS, a very popular GIS platform, they use GIS to essentially track different ongoing conservation projects across Pennsylvania. So they're able to, zoom in, take a look at a site, see the current progress of conservation, right? So they can see, oh, maybe this riverbank doesn't have vegetation or riparian buffers at the moment. Okay, let's draw a box around the site. This is a place perhaps that we could run a project on, right? So they're using GIS in a way to track projects currently. It's very hard to, I have brought up the idea of like, okay, the digital twin, what if we like model the entire thing? It is very, very hard right now still to, send a person to every single site and do that. It's a really awesome idea though. I'm always very curious, at what point would that be possible, right? Would it require a person going on site for every single site? Maybe if it's a very important project, they could send someone on site and use one of these tools. I forgot the name of some of these popular digital tools. Matterport, I think, is one of the popular digital twin platforms out there that allows you to buy a camera and scan the entire room and basically see the 3D, revisit the 3D design of that room. Yeah, there might be some opportunity there. I mean, that's something that even a lot of our Penn State Extension and emerging technology folks think a lot about. I have not seen it used as often in the water and conservation space yet, but maybe that's something to explore.
Yeah, definitely.
If I may add, so I just finished writing a brief on this use of AI on SDG 6 particularly. And on that, while doing the research for that, I came across two of the work done by, like back in India and Bangladesh, done by SD India and IPE Global. They examined 50 years of like historic data, rainfall data and all that, satellite imagery, and then, soil condition and all that to, predict flood condition and drought condition and to, get early on warning system and all that. And there is another one from Google, which was AI monitoring system, which uses similar, that was for India and Bangladesh both. And they feed on that data, combining those AI, running the AI, models based on those data, soil data, satellite imagery, and historical flood and drought data to inform, and that also inform the agriculture community. If there is a drought condition, then certain kind of crop they can switch over to, so that it requires less water, versus also for flooding related, of course, is early warning system. But that was interesting finding to use how AI is combined with all these things to do actual real world work in this sector.
Yeah, you mentioned Google. There's actually I saw something pop up across my timeline from Google Research. They have a new, I think, geospatial AI platform, and that's something I've not played around with that yet. But for the folks here that might be interested, that might be something to check out. I'm going to check it out certainly today.
Yeah, the different uses of kind of AI, specifically the different platforms coming in with a focus on the global south, especially the India and Bangladesh sort of delta area where floods, like you said, Savitri, is a very much an issue of concern, even on a national level, where a lot of the economy is dependent on the agriculture there, and which in turn depends on the water usage. Brooke, yeah, did you have anything to build on that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to take away from Juan's point, but I'll just go ahead. So Vitri, I was just kind of thinking, how about how you talked about a special state case study of Bangladesh and India, and how, there are all these people that have all these technologies to help, identify markers and that help support clean the SDG 6 and essentially. When you're making your policies, I'm not sure for who or, where exactly, what regions it kind of targets, but, many regions are very different and they have a lot of them vary, differently with what they, just like how their geography is built. And, some people will have different applications. Well, different applications will work for some regions than others. And I was wondering, what is that disparity between people who actually get a lot of help versus people who maybe doesn't really help them that much, and I was wondering, what your perspective is, SC, yeah, I'm just leaving.
So that is an interesting question because I that gets into the disparity in how the AI accessibility is. Like some part will be and some part will not be. But the study I mentioned, they are more localized. So they can do a more localized, information, especially the areas where the traditional system of warning is not present. So and in India and Bangladesh and all that regions, we use a mobile technology a lot to do business and communicate. It's like a lifeline kind of thing. So using that to send those information where missing of, in case where the missing the traditional warning system and all that, and they are doing some local. I'll see if I can find the link to those studies. I'll post it in the chat. Interestingly, during my dissertation, that's one thing I was trying to bring. It was on disability policies, but my focus was how like India is so diverse and it can be applied for any country with geographically very versatile, or it's in America, US also, like we have state which are mountains, some state which flat. How one fit policies cannot be one policy fit all kind of system. Sometimes you have to localize it in terms of how the geography is. Sometimes infrastructure is difficult to build in those areas, like in Meghalaya, which is a northern part of the India, which gets a lot of rainfalls, the mud sliding and all that. You build something, it's difficult to access those areas during monsoon season because there is so much mud sliding, the roads are gone. So those kind of things, that was my focus, like when we create any policy. In that example, it was a disability policy, but how we can more localize it rather than one national policy to have it more impactful, on the everyday life people who are living with any kind of disability. So that is an interesting, yeah, and I agree that it has to be, it is more impactful if it's more localized with those information we get.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, having localized and like more intricate and localized policies, I think definitely cater to the different types of regions out there for SDG 6. But yeah, thank you for that.
100%. Thank you both, as well as Ray, for adding to the discussion on disparity, where a lot of like you said, one policy fits all. It's just not a realistic solution for almost any place because of the unique significance of each sort of geographic elements that are there in the different parts of the world. On that note, yeah, Juan. Sorry, I think your mic is, yeah.
Yeah, I just realized that. Sorry about that. Thank you, Rakiv, and also Savitri and Raymond. I really appreciate you guys coming in here and sharing your expertise on this topic and everything you know. I've really appreciated sitting here and listening to the whole conversation. But real quickly, I know, Savitri, you've been kind of touching on this a lot. I feel like Brooke also kind of touched on my question as well as Raymond. It kind of went full circle, but what I was thinking about was how before Ray, you were talking about how uh, data could be very, I mean, there's a lot of problems with in terms of like privacy and security and things like that, and how that also like promotes but also prevents driving policy, which is kind of essential to make a lot of these big changes. And I was wondering, like we need the data to be able to present so that we can drive these policies, but maybe, other than getting the current data of like what our situations are, just for the example of like the water and the lead pipes that we were just talking about. Do you think, just for anybody in general as well, like doesn't have to be a specific person answering, but do you guys think that there's ways to use AI to potentially create models to show the future implications of certain areas, certain hazards, things that could happen in the future if we continue at the pace that we're at and we don't make these corrections? And do you think that could potentially drive policy change, showing like the problems that will occur if we don't do something sooner than later?
Um, I will try to answer that a little bit, and anyone feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts. I think you're getting into like data privacy or overutilization. I'm just thinking out loud right now. So correct me if I'm wrong. So you're trying to say there's over reliance on data kind of thing? Is that what you're getting, or just too much using in a way that we earlier discussed, that sometimes it can drive negative policies, or in a way maybe harmful? Is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, I was thinking of like in terms of we're currently trying to use, well, at least I think from what we were saying, from what I understood is that we're trying to use data to drive solutions. And I think like if we drive the solutions in terms of looking at it from the problem side and show the huge impact that it will create if we don't have solutions for it, it could potentially help open up these privacy, companies not wanting to share that privacy with people because they might have an edge over something, like trying to show, like in terms of policy that it is beneficial to work all together and not bring down these barriers of privacy by showing like the huge implications that could occur in the future down the road for everybody.
I agree, and that would be a larger conversation within the government, like agencies, and within globally as well, data sharing policies and all that, how that is handled, so it's not misused or utilized well, or there is no one monopoly on certain kind of thing, if that's what you're getting at. And that would be, I would say, needs to happen simultaneously, not to wait for we to reach at that stage where we are like, okay, there's just one entity controlling everything. So yeah, those conversations I think needs to happen. I hope I think they are happening, but needs to happen at the same time as we do more and more work on AI. And then I don't know, I also like see a negative from that as well. Like, I don't want to see over reliance on technology as well, because there are a lot of places, well, as I mentioned, when you factor in how different places might be different in terms of access. So sometimes they rely on traditional methods, which are very impactful and effective. They've been using those for maybe centuries in some. I think there was an example from Rajasthan. I'm forgetting the name of the technique they use, where they use the natural, how the land is. So they collect the rainwater there, the runoff water they collect there, and then they utilize it. That's been used for centuries in India's and I think in Rajasthan, which is usually a very, it's a desert area, so it's, water is a scarce thing. So those kind of, and there is other kind of technologies used in different part of the world. So that's one thing I also see, that like, over relying on those and not considering that those things which are work that can be a solution for certain areas as well, rather than pushing technological solution there, but it's not needed.
the over reliance on technology, definitely very, very interesting. Yeah, Ray, yeah, if you have something to add.
Yeah, Juan, you mentioned something about I think you there was a portion of your question that was about using AI for, what if we don't do anything? Was that part of the question? I just wanted to make sure you talked a little bit about the what if we don't do anything part.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was like, potentially we could create models that with the data we already have, we could show with these models like how bad it will get. Like what if we don't do something? So yeah, that was kind of also where I was leaning towards.
Mhm. Yeah, this topic is actually quite interesting right now with the new administration too, because a lot of the research, we're talking about like resilience, right? We're talking about like, okay, we're trying to explore resilience if the climate is changing, and like especially with a lot of researchers that work on this topic of trying to predict resilience, right? It gets a little bit touchy with the types of wording that you could use. But besides the federal funding dollars into research, ultimately a lot of the work that's being done to explore resilience using AI, if we don't do anything, is coming from the private sector. A lot of the folks that, especially a lot of the businesses that have supply chains that are very dependent on, a commodity that could be potentially impacted by climate change, right? So, I was recently talking to there was let me see if I can find the name of the company. There's a company called I'll type it in here. But yeah, there's companies trying to de-risk their supply chain, and that's where a lot of the dollars, or I guess a lot of the investment, is coming from when it comes to trying to use certain technologies to explore resilience. And we think about some of the supply chains that are more risky, right? You think about perhaps say coffee or some of the commodities in South America and all these other areas, right? Those companies, the companies that are procuring those commodities are very much willing to invest dollars into technology to try to de-risk their supply chain. And so that's where I see a lot of the, even if there's not as much investment from the federal government into exploring this topic, there's definitely a lot of private sector exploring stuff of this sort. Yeah.
And yeah, roots. Just before we go ahead with your question, I just wanted to say, so we are at the end of our conversation circle today. This will be the last question, and for apologies for the lack of time. I'd love to continue, but if our panelists are okay, just stay on for a couple more minutes while we take this one last question, and then we'll go on to the conclusion of the meeting. Yeah, Roots.
Yes. Hi. I wrote my question just to make it faster, but I think my question was answered kind of in between what everyone was saying. So as AI is still under development and the water and unsanitary issue is more physical as discussed earlier, would you say or aware if AI algorithms tracks water pollutions or issues faster and more accurately than traditional methods, and if it alleviates the extra work and allows space for more work to be done, or is it like more of a burden to include it, or it's effectively and working faster and giving us more space to get more work done at the moment?
That's an interesting question from a couple of aspects. So I think it goes back to the brief discussion we had about the access, like who has the which countries, or even within the countries where you have access to build in those data systems and all that, to invest on those infrastructure to be able to, or just rely on traditional way if we don't have, versus in some cases, as I mentioned, like might be working. So I think it's an interesting I don't want to say case by case basis, but it's also if it's needed in certain areas, but they don't have the a capability to build the infrastructure, that is not helpful either, because that's the area where it's needed to see the monitoring and all that. So, but yeah, that gets into a whole different discussion altogether. But I would like to mention this interesting tidbit, if you know about, like I came across during my research, while we are talking about like AI and using AI to SDG 6. I don't know if most of us know that running those data center needs a lot of water, which is ironic to cool down those systems, like, hundreds and so many large data systems from Google or from maybe ChatGPT. You use 100-word query in ChatGPT, use a bottle of water kind of thing. So it's sort of, interesting thing how advanced we take it to talk about SDG6 while it utilizes the resource, natural resource like water. So yeah, that was something interesting I came across, and I really had to think about it, and I still is. But that was like, oh, I didn't know about that. Sorry to take the train or somewhere else.
No, yeah, I think it's very apparent. I was actually hoping for the discussion to go in a direction at some point, touch on some of the negatives that AI, looking at it from such a positive lens. It's not always sunshine and rainbows, and it is only fair that we bring up these topics at discussions of this sort to highlight how AI is inherently sort of negatively impacting a lot of these SDG spaces, while we try to improve and make progress towards these goals. There may be sort of hidden negative consequences that often get overlooked, but is just as important to be mitigated at the same time. And thank you so much for taking the discussion today into so many different sort of lanes and adding the different dynamics to it that we have, starting from the negatives of data centers using AI, using a lot of the natural resources, including water, that we've touched on, as well as the climate change aspect on the water and sanitation space today, and adding a technology lens. Raymond and Savitri, just want to say thank you as part of UNA, as well as the UN Foundation and the rest of us who are here in audience today. Thank you all for engaging, and that concludes, on this note, our conversation circle today. Just wanted to give the last minute to both of our panelists to end the session.
Yeah, thank you again. And for folks that maybe want to chat a little bit further, I've also worked a lot with the water issues in the Colorado River Basin, as well as Central California and some of these other areas. So, it's for folks that are interested in perhaps the drought side of water and some of those related issues, I'd be happy to chat more.
And thank you so much, Rakhi, for inviting me. I enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot about the Pennsylvania itself. So it's not that long since I moved to Pennsylvania, so it's good to learn something about the state I'm in. But yeah, thank you everyone for the questions as well, and it was fun.